Bonjour, everyone. Welcome to Generator. I am so thrilled about my guest today. I have been following her forever. And if you're not following her on Instagram, make sure you do. I'll put a mention in the show notes below. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Anne-Laure Le Cunff. She's an award-winning neuroscientist and entrepreneur. She has an amazing background. She's also the founder of Ness Labs. Her weekly newsletter is read by more than 100,000 curious minds, she says. She's just recently completed her PhD and has done research at King's College London focused on psychology and neuroscience of lifelong learning, curiosity, and adaptability. Her upcoming book, Tiny Experiments, is a transformative guide for living a more experimental life, turning uncertainty into curiosity, and carving a path of self-discovery. Previously, she worked at Google as an executive on digital health projects. Her work has been featured in Rolling Stone, Forbes, Financial Times, and Wired. I'm thrilled to have Anne-Laure Le Cunff with us today. Welcome, Anne-Laure. Welcome to Generate Her. I'm Jane Bertch. I spent the first half of my life working in a corporate organization, and then I decided to trade that all in to become an entrepreneur. Yes, here in your favorite city of Paris, France. And today, I hope I'm a guide on your journey to personal reinvention and transformation. So I'm so pleased to have Anne-Laure here with us today. I've been following Anne-Laure's work for quite a while, and it's thrilling and amazing, and it speaks to so many things you've heard me talk about. But we're here to talk about her today. So Anne-Laure, I'd love to know about you. Tell me a bit about yourself.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And I guess I can tell you a little bit about my path so far.
Yes.
I think about my life and my career almost as if it was divided into two main chapters, two main parts. And the first one was very linear. I wanted to be successful. I had a clear idea of how to get there, and then I worked really, really hard. So in that part of my life, I worked at Google. I started a startup, and that seemed to work pretty okay, except that even though I was successful on the outside, I felt completely empty on the inside. And when my startup failed for the first time in my life, I finally asked myself, what is it I want to do? Even if success is out of the equation, what is something I'm sufficiently curious about, excited about, that I would want to wake up in the morning and explore it, even if nobody was watching?
Right.
And for me, that was the brain. I had always been fascinated with why we think the way we think and feel the way we feel. So I went back to university to study neuroscience. And that started the second chapter of my life, where I was studying every day, reading papers, writing. I started a newsletter to share everything I was excited about and that I was discovering. That newsletter grew pretty quickly and turned into a business. And then publishers started reaching out and asking if I wanted to write a book. So now I run this business called Ness Labs, which is helping people be more productive, more creative without sacrificing their mental health. I also wrote a book. I completed my PhD in neuroscience. And the amazing thing about this chapter is that I have no idea where I'm going. I'm actually still lost, but
I love it.
I'm embracing it. Yeah.
I love it, Anne-Laure. So, oh gosh, there's so many things to dig into there. We kind of have a similar background. I spent the first half of my career, let me say the first chapter, working in banking. And I was so very focused. I was so linear about where I wanted to get to. And my shift came due to some very difficult family circumstances. And it made me ask myself, is this what I want to do with my life? And I wasn't sure. And I kind of felt like I love to talk about the universe. You know, it's funny for somebody like me that's been very focused and business minded to also leave the magic of the universe, which I think there is, to give you these little hints of what you want to do and how you want to approach it. But still, yet that can be scary for somebody who's so focused and driven to say, okay, we're just going to stand here in the moment and see what speaks to me. So how did you manage? I mean, maybe it was very fluid and easy, but were there points of insecurity, and how did you muster yourself to push forward?
I love that you're mentioning the universe, because I'm a scientist, but I'm also fairly spiritual. And to me, it's not necessarily that the universe is actively sending you any kind of signs, but it's really about the signs that you decide to pay attention to. There are coincidences all the time, serendipity all the time. But when we're too focused on a specific outcome, we don't pay attention to those other possibilities, to those doors that keep on opening around us. So for me, two things. There's this expression I really like, I mentioned in the book, which is a petite existential crisis. And it's when something happens in your life that kind of shakes your routines and shakes your beliefs, and that makes you reconsider what you want. You mentioned that you had that shattering experience yourself. In my case, it was a blood clot in my arm, which the doctors found. And my the blood clot was not what actually made me realize that something was wrong. It was my response. My response when I heard that I had a blood clot was to try and figure out when I could schedule the surgery so it would be the less disruptive possible for the rest of the team that I was working with when I was at Google. Which, when you think about it, is a completely skewed sense of priorities. Your health is less important than your productivity. So that was for me that little petite existential crisis that I had that made me realize that something was deeply wrong and that I had to reconsider the way I was approaching my life in general.
Right, right. Wow. In that transition, which is quite a big transition, it's a phenomenal transition you made to leave kind of corporate and then decide to study and focus on this very interesting matter we have sitting in our head. How did you manage that transition? What were some of the steps you decided to take?
I'm so glad you're asking, because I feel like there's a lot of dangerous advice on the internet where people say, just quit your job, follow your dream. And
yeah,
that's,
that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's very dangerous. And obviously, because of the survivorship bias, and because of the fact that we only share the stories of people who have succeeded, we might feel like that's the right thing to do. In my case, I did fall prey to that a little bit. I just quit my job at Google, and I was like, I'm going to go and do my startup, and that didn't work out. When I decided to go back to school and study neuroscience, I decided to be a little bit more intentional with the way I was going to do this. So I continued freelancing and consulting on the side while I was studying. That was really helpful in the sense that I knew I would be able to pay for my rent. And that freed up a lot of mental space also to just be able to study, to explore, and to write, and not necessarily have to worry about transforming my curiosity into something financially productive straight away.
Right, right. Okay. Sage advice. And you're quite right. We're bombarded with images that are curated and not necessarily a real representation of life and the struggles and the little steps you take to get there. So I think that's wonderful advice. Anne-Laure, you talk a lot about curiosity. I'd like to also talk a bit about creativity, because I think they're so intertwined. I'd love to hear your opinion on that. And I think it takes such creativity to reimagine yourself, to reimagine your business, to reimagine the world around you, to problem solve. So, what creative processes do you go through that have worked for you to help you stay focused and provide all this wonderful content that you share daily?
That actually connects really well with the question you just asked me before about the steps, how I approached this transition, because I think the only reason why this transition was successful was because I combined curiosity and creativity together. So there was obviously the curiosity of learning, of exploring, reading papers, and just spending a lot of time consuming information. But there was also the other side of that coin, the creativity, actually creating my own version of what I was consuming. So not just being a consumer, but becoming a creator in the process. And I know these days, because of the creator economy, we immediately think about YouTubers and those kinds of creators, but there are many ways to create. And that can be writing, that can also be hosting conversations with friends, inviting people over to have tea and say, hey, here are the things that I discovered this week, and I'm going to share them with you. Being more generative in general with the way you approach life, and thinking about everything you consume in terms of what it is you can transform and make your own and create out of this raw material that you're consuming. And so for me, that's how Ness Labs started. Every week, I said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take something that I learned this week, and I'm going to create my own version of it. And I'm going to share it with others. And so I created this little newsletter, which initially was just friends, former colleagues, and my dad, and that's it. And
that's how all new things start.
Exactly. And it grew pretty quickly because it created a feedback loop. And that's the other part of creativity I think is important. It can be really tempting when we're new to something and when we haven't built that confidence yet to just create on our own without sharing anything that we create in the process, because we feel like it's not perfect. People might judge us. And who are we? We're not the expert to be able to share what we've created with the world. But you learn a lot faster if you put your work into the world and you share it with everyone, even if it's your work in progress, because you're going to get feedback, you're going to learn from it, and you can then implement those changes and grow much faster.
Right, absolutely. And I'm thrilled I feel like everything is so interconnected. I recently did a post about taking risks. And we do that all day long. They're choices. And of course, they're choices possibly with more consequence. But I said there's 4 things that help me to take risk: curiosity, creativity, a small bit of courage, and community. And that sounds so much like what you're saying, those elements, and, to take courage to share it, and then have a community that can give you live feedback so you can continue to ideate and refine what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. We're social creatures, right?
Mm,
And even if you remove the very practical, logical aspect of saying you're going to learn faster, so it is just going to be more efficient if you learn in public and if you do it with others. There's joy. There's just joy in the
absolutely.
process of sharing this journey and not waiting until you're 5 steps ahead and looking back on others. Just being on this journey with other people, growing alongside others. There's a lot of joy in that as well.
Absolutely. So speaking of community and joy in others, let's talk a bit more about Ness Labs, because I just find this fascinating. To me, this is like a powerhouse of minds and community and sharing and knowledge and growing, in a positive way, which we need so very much these days. So what you've done is provide this beautiful container for people, um, not just for their own growth, but feeding the larger community around them. So what has been your biggest, most pleasant surprise with this amazing thing that you created? Is it what you expected now that you look back?
Oh no, it's completely taken a life of its own, which I think is the biggest and most beautiful surprise that I got out of it. I loved how you used the word container, because looking back, this is exactly what I created. I wasn't really sure what I was creating. The community, for context, was created in March 2020, and we all know what happened then. It was not a coincidence. I created the community because at the end of each Ness Labs newsletter, I had a little postscriptum where I said, hey, hit reply, tell me how you're feeling, what you're working on. It was kind of a way of knowing what was happening with my audience and readers. And in March 2020, everybody started replying saying, I feel lonely, I feel disconnected, my creativity is gone, not feeling too good. stuck at home, not getting that energy from my colleagues. So that's when I thought, what about creating this private community, this safe space where anyone who wants to go a little bit deeper and who wants to share their journey can connect with like-minded people who are also curious and creative. So I created this private community. I put the link in the newsletter and I said, anyone who wants to join, you can join. Again, not a lot of thinking behind it. I didn't have a 5-year plan. And yet here we are 5 years later.
Yeah,
the community is
exactly.
still active. Yeah. And it's amazing. And it doesn't look like anything I could have imagined. You have people giving workshops for other people. We have members of the community who have been running co-working sessions for years. We have amazing conversations. Everybody's learning from each other. And to me, that's the most beautiful thing about the Ness Labs community is that it's a peer learning experience. So it's not me teaching everybody else what to do and how to design their lives. It's everybody sharing their journey and then learning from each other, taking notes, experimenting with different approaches and seeing what works, what doesn't, sharing back what they learn into the community. And so everybody is growing together.
Right, right. If you were, and you touched on it, but just so we can summarize, because I think you've just in a few minutes covered so much rich content that people out there can think about for themselves, how they can create their little local ecosystems to help bolster their creativity, bolster their curiosity, create a community. What would you say are some of the things that make it successful? Why has it worked?
The main aspect that I think makes the Ness Labs community successful is empowering members to be agents in the community, to offer their own teaching experiences, to learn from each other. So anyone in the Ness Labs community can create a new community event. And that can be a workshop, that can be a co-working session. We sometimes have just discussion spaces. We have people who pick a research paper they thought was interesting and they just say, hey, let's have a little journal club and discuss this paper together. We have a lot of people who, that's what I love too, who are taking a topic that they discovered fairly recently, like in the past month, and they run a session around this topic. They say, hi, I've been studying this. I think it's interesting. Do you want to learn more about it together? So you don't need to be an expert in the Ness Labs community to start teaching others whatever you've discovered that you think is interesting. And because of that, we've also had a lot of members who use the Ness Labs community as a springboard. They run their very first workshop ever in the Ness Labs community. And then they went on to delivering those workshops at bigger companies and actually making money out of those skills.
That's incredible. That's such a testament, again, to this wonderful organism that you've created. That sounds like it's got a life of its own, but a very brilliant, warm, encouraging life. Wow. So I will make sure to include all in the show notes, the links to Ness Labs, because I just think it's a fabulous resource that people could use. But let me back up to the thing I'm also just so intrigued by, the brain. I have so many questions. I don't even know where to begin. And I love neuroscience. I mean, I'm imagining the name Tara Schwartz. She wrote a book called The Source. I love to watch her content. I love your content. I'm just so fascinated with how we think as humans. If you were to tell me maybe 2 or 3 top tips of things you can do to stimulate your brain to talk about all of these elements that we've surfaced just very quickly. Don't give away too many secrets, because I know the biggest thing we're going to talk about is your book that's coming imminently. But what would you advise somebody at home that is trying to get themselves motivated, trying to connect with community? What are there any little tricks we can play on ourselves?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones is the fact that we've recently discovered that impulsivity and curiosity share the same networks in the brain. So the same networks are activated if you're feeling like, I need to do this right now. And if you're curious about something. And because of that, you can kind of hijack your impulsivity and decide to direct it towards something you're curious about. And so if you really feel the urge, for example, to click on something and maybe fall into that doom scrolling that we've all experienced, you're on TikTok and you can't stop, catch yourself in that moment. And this moment of impulsivity, you can ask yourself, oh, wait a second. How can I redirect this impulse towards something else I'm more curious about? Can I maybe go in and grab a book, a magazine, something that I've put on the table? Can I maybe pick up the phone and call a friend and ask how their weekend went? Because that's something I'm curious about. I actually don't know how they've been and what's been going on in their lives. The very important part for this to work, for this little tip to work, is for the alternative impulse, the curiosity impulse, to be something that's very easy to do for you in the moment. And that's the same with diet, for example. That's why they tell you make sure to have healthy snacks next to you. Same,
Right.
make sure to have healthy curiosity actions, curiosity snacks that are easy for you to grab so you can redirect your impulse. So that's one of my favorite tips.
I love the term curiosity snacks. You have to do something with that.
I've never used it before.
Well,
I've never used
are.
that word before, that term before. Yeah.
I love it. And I could see you doing a whole post on like, here's your top curiosity snacks for the week. I absolutely love that. So speaking of curiosity snacks, one thing that I'm going to be snacking on heavily is your book, Tiny Experiments. Tell me about how you had the idea, how you decided to approach it, who it's for. I'll pepper in questions as you're going. So over to you.
So as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, after a little while when I had been writing the Ness Labs newsletter for a few years, 3 years exactly, publishers started reaching out and asking whether I wanted to write a book. I thought that was an amazing idea. I was very excited to turn all of this research that I had conducted, all of those papers that I read, all of these insights and anything I had learned also based on my personal experience, but also working with all of the members of the Ness Labs community, turning all of that into a book. That was very exciting to me. So I said yes, and I got to work. It was not easy because I was used to just writing the newsletter every week, and writing a book is very, very different, obviously. But I'm very glad that I put all of the love and the work and the effort into creating this book. It's a book about how to live a more experimental life, how to embrace a more experimental mindset. And just like I had two chapters in my life, one that was very linear, where I was focused on an end goal and I wanted to be successful at all costs, and a second part of my life where I'm more experimental. I'm happy to not know where I'm going. I'm trying new things. I'm exploring. I'm open to new opportunities that might look very different from what I'm doing right now. This book is about how to create this kind of second chapter in your life and providing you with the tools to do that.
I love that. I love that. So I recently saw that you shared their 7 key concepts for the book, and you do talk about curiosity a lot, which we've discussed. And if I can poke in on 2 of the concepts that I thought were intriguing, and maybe we talk about them just a little. Experimental mindset. Tell me about that.
So, an experimental mindset is the same mindset that a scientist has. It's really about becoming the scientist of your own life. A scientist, instead of trying to get to a specific destination or a specific outcome, they start with a hypothesis, a research question. They ask themselves, oh, what might happen if we tried that? That's the mindset that a scientist has. And that has a lot of different second order consequences in terms of how you approach your life in general. One of the biggest ones is that you completely reimagine your relationship to success and failure. Because for a scientist, success is not, again, getting to a specific destination, a specific outcome. If they knew what would happen, they would not run the experiment in the first place. That would be wasted time and energy. Success is learning something new. As long as you run an experiment and you learn something new, you learn something you didn't know before starting the experiment, you're successful. And because of that, you can run lots of tiny experiments in your life and just learn and grow. And that's the second consequence of starting to think like this, of having this mindset, is that you can actually grow without knowing where you're going, which might feel paradoxical, but is not really, because it's just about changing your mindset from a linear approach to success that looks like a ladder that you climb to a more circular approach, a cycle of experimentation where every time you go through a loop, you collect more data, and then you tweak and iterate your approach, and you keep on growing in this way.
Right. I love that. And I think that's such a positive reframe. I meet so many people who are wanting to affect, it could be professional or personal reinvention or transformation. And they're so focused on they must know the end goal. And one, they can't figure out how to get there. Or if they do, they become landlocked for fear of what if it doesn't work? Is it too much of a risk? And I think the way you framed it is a wonderful way for people to have a freedom to express different versions of themselves to see where they might end up.
I'm so glad it resonates. And absolutely,
Yeah.
this is really designed for people who are both curious and ambitious. So it's a tool, a way, a mindset for you to leverage this curiosity, use it to
Right.
explore and try new things. But it's also a call to trying something a little bit smaller, a little bit safer. Just have fun, try something new. You don't have to go for a big goal every time.
Right. Right. So speaking of, the other concept I'd love to dig into just briefly is intentional imperfection. That sounds so scary and so delicious. At the same time, I love it. Tell me about that.
Well, I love naming concepts. So it says what it is on the tin, as they say in the UK. And intentional imperfection is really about embracing the fact that it is absolutely impossible to be perfect across the board. You will have to have trade offs in life. So if you decide to work really late, staying with your boss to work on a presentation because there's a big launch event tomorrow, you might decide to miss bath time and story time with your kid, for example. If you decide that you want to be there for your kid's first big sports game, that might mean not going to that award event with your company, for example. And every time you decide to give something 100%, that means that you'll have to give less than that to another part of your life. The problem is that for a lot of people, we see that as something we need to fix, which we can't. And so we blame ourselves when we're not 100% across the board. When in reality, once you accept the fact that it is literally just the way things are, you cannot be perfect across the board. You can be intentional in terms of where you're going to aim for near perfection in some areas, and where you're going to just go for what I talk about it in the book is called strategic mediocrity in another part of your life. And that's not permanent. That's just saying that this week or this month, this is not my top priority. I'll still do my job. I'll show up. I'll be here. It's not like I'll do a terrible job, but I'm not going to give this part of my life or my work my all because I have this other part that is more important right now. That's intentional imperfection.
Okay, fabulous. Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion. You've left us with so many nuggets. One thing I'd like to ask all of my guests, because I'm always fascinated by this topic. I actually wrote my thesis on the importance of role models for women and how I believe they are a strong indication of who we want to become. We can cherry pick things we see in our role models, men or women, that we try to integrate into ourselves. And ultimately, because we do that, they're with us today. My first role model in the bank that I worked for many years ago is still a part of who I am today. I'd love to know, who are your role models? Who have they been through the years? Who's influenced you?
My answer is going to be a little bit cheesy, but it's just
Okay.
true. For me, it's my mom.
I love
And
that.
Thank you. She grew up with really, like, she didn't have an education. She stopped going to school very early. And despite that, she always felt like whatever she would decide to put her mind to, she would be able to achieve. And because of that, she's actually done a lot of amazing things in life. And when I was growing up, she always not pushed me, but encouraged me to explore things that I wanted to try. And I think the one thing that she really hated me say was, "Oh, I don't think I'm good enough for this. There's no way I would be accepted. There's no way that I'll be able to apply." And she always said, "Just give it a try. You'll see what happens." And this give it a try, let's see what happens attitude has brought a lot of good things in my life. So yeah, she would be my role model.
That's amazing. And it sounds like that give it a try, just see what happens is just like the perfect intro into the tiny experiments. Just try.
Yes, exactly.
Just try your tiny experiments.
Yeah.
So on that note, I'm so looking forward to your book. I'll include that in the links to it in the show notes. I wish you much success. I'm so excited to meet this wonderful woman in person that I have been watching all of your work. So thank you for sharing time on our podcast today. And I can't wait to get this out in the world.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.